the Spurs are at 19-20, which means we're 39 games into the season, which means by the time we talk next, we will probably be past the halfway point in the NBA season for the San Antonio Spurs. So we just kind of wanted, I know we just did the mid-season Christmas roster breakdown where we kind of talked about a lot of the things that the guys can get better at, but just overall on the team, what are some themes now that we're halfway through the season on the court that you've seen, negative or positive?
I think largely it's been positive. I think our IQ is way higher. Our chemistry is a lot better. Defensive intensity is there. When our team is healthy, you can see the cohesion, and we're actually able to win games. I mean, 19-20, like I had said in the last episode, if you had told me that
Mm-hmm.
last year this time, I'd be more than happy.
Right.
That is outstanding. I think where the frustration comes in, and we start getting into negatives. I think I saw a stat today, and forgive me, I don't know the exact number here, but I think it was in games that we were leading going into the third or fourth quarter, we've lost like 15 of those, and where
Mm-hmm.
we've just completely unraveled in the second half execution. And if we had won those rather than lost, we would be second in the conference right now.
Wow.
So I think that's the level that we're at. We just need that extra step and that extra injection of maturity, if you will, to finally pull out these games and execute in late game situations. And that just comes with time. And I think patience. We're getting to that point. I think the second half of the year we'll start to see us winning more of those games. But that's definitely why I kind of empathize with some of Twitter when they're pissed off that we're 19-20, because it does feel like we should have a better record if you are watching the games like we are.
And I think the thing that adds to that, Ethan, the part that you were touching on at the end there, is that that's almost the same sentiment that we've had over the past 2 years as
Yeah.
well. As much as that was completely different, before Victor, but it felt like we were always just blowing the game in our hands. Like even in the 2022 season when we're tanking for Victor and Keldon's keeping us in games, you know what I mean? Which is why he averaged 22 points. And I know we've talked about this
Hmm.
so much for all you SSPN OGs. But in that season, even it felt like we were hanging around, but at the last moment, we would just collapse.
Yeah.
And so when you have that same sentiment now, even though we're winning more games, that makes it even more frustrating. And I feel a little bit of that, but I
Hmm.
try to, and it's not to sit here on a pedestal and say that I know everything, but I try to take myself back and realize, hey, we were 22-60 last season. Like again, I forget what the number was, but I mean, the number of wins that we're at now, like we didn't get 12 wins until like the end of January last year or something like that.
Hmm.
I can't remember. It might not have been 12, but I remember we talked about a certain double digit number when we got to like 11 wins or something like that around like November and December.
Right.
And I remember you mentioned that. And so that's the thing that you got to keep in mind. And it sucks too, because again, and we talked about this last episode, but with as good as Victor is, that's another thing that makes you want to like, oh man, like just make moves now because it feels like we can win these games now with how good he is. But the other thing that we've got to remember too is he's only going to continue to get even and even better. And I know there's two sides to that. The other side is okay, that's another reason to accelerate the timeline. But
Hmm.
the other side to that is that with how he improves, that's also going to make up for some of the losses that we've had this year with him getting better. Now, you don't want to just put everything on him. Like that second star conversation is true and it's legit, but we've got draft picks. You just don't want to rush that whole situation. And we've
For sure.
already talked about that. I don't want to repeat myself. We've made episodes on that before. But getting back to just where the Spurs are at the halfway point and things on the court that I think that they could get better at or continue to do good at. I think it really just goes back to incremental, improvements. I hate
Hmm.
to just be basic, but that's really what we've seen this year. We're still seeing a lot of the same themes, but it's not as bad. So we're winning more games.
Right.
I know that's oversimplifying it, but you get what I'm saying?
Sometimes I feel like you need to oversimplify it, because when you're in the details like we are, unfortunately, every single day, you sometimes overanalyze some things, right? You're looking at advanced metrics, advanced stats on every individual player, every individual quarter, and you're like, where is the disconnection? Why aren't we winning these
Mhm.
games? But if you really just zoom out and look at the standings and look at these teams just like one to one, we're only 2.5 games away from the sixth seed. You know,
In year 2.
in year two. The West today compared to 2 years ago is much more competitive. The
Yeah.
margin between seed 1 through really 11 is so slim. Like there have probably been like the Houston Rockets are 27-13. I don't think we're that far away from the Houston Rockets, if I'm being completely honest. I know they have Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün. They're probably both going to be in discussions for All Stars. Maybe not Jalen, but Alperen Şengün, and they're second in the West. But I still, every game that we play against them, I'm like, the Spurs have a shot. We have a
Mhm.
real chance to win this game. Same against the Memphis Grizzlies. Same against the Denver Nuggets, the Clippers, the Lakers. OKC is kind of in a different echelon, but we're within grasp of the rest of these teams in the league. And to me, that's overwhelmingly positive compared to where we were the last 2 years.
In a 20,000-foot view, we've made significant improvements.
100%.
Yeah.
And we still have a couple contracts that are obviously negative that we're going to have to get off of in the next couple of years. I'm thinking of Zach Collins. I know that I see some negative comments about him. He won't
Mhm.
be here in 2 years. He might be gone next year. We don't know what the trade's going to look like, or the trade market's going to look like. We have 4 or 5 first round picks in the upcoming
That's
draft
the
period.
other thing I was gonna say too, and I didn't even get to that, but that's why it's like, when it comes to the whole trade discussion, it's like your
Hmm.
seconds look at how good Stephon Castle is this year, and everybody's saying that this year's draft, like even last year when we were talking about last year's draft, it even got brought up that like next year is supposed to be like significantly better. So if we can get somebody like Castle where we got him last year, imagine the value that we could get in this draft with potentially multiple picks and
Hmm.
what those guys could look like. But then again, with all of the picks that you have, maybe there is something that comes up, a move that you like where you can get a star that's relatively, young and fits your roster and fits the timeline. So there's a lot of options with the Spurs, but I think they're taking the we don't want to just sit here and say that, oh, the Spurs are perfect and doing everything right and there's nothing to criticize. But genuinely, in year 2 with Victor, this is the improvement that you wanted to see. There's still things on the court that are frustrating, that are similar storylines from years past that the Spurs can need to continue to work on and get better at. And roster wise, there are just some straight up upgrades that are going to happen at some point.
Hmm.
But as of right now, being at 500, man, in year 2 after another 22-60 season really is a solid place to be.
For sure. And I see MEC's comment. The Rockets do have better athletes just in general than the Spurs, and they are a better team. I don't want to be misunderstood in the comments. The Rockets are better than the Spurs. However, I think about what the Rockets looked like last year and the year before. They weren't this good. Ime Udoka has them playing the right way. It takes time, it takes energy, and they have a lot more uh, reps under their belt. Like, think about how bad Jalen Green was for the first 3 or 4 years
Yeah.
he was in the
Yeah.
league. Alperen Şengün was good, but a lot of people complained about him until this year as well. And then what's the guy that they drafted after we drafted Jeremy? So Tari Eason, he's playing a lot better this year. Last year he was really, really up and down. So these things kind of do take time. Um, yeah, and CP3 is definitely helping. And we
Same
don't
thing
have
with
Greg
the
Popovich.
HB.
We always forget. I mean, Greg Popovich is still the greatest coach of all time, and I'm
Yeah.
not. And no disrespect to Mitch Johnson, but things may be a little bit better if you have the most seasoned, most winningest
Yeah.
coach of all time on the bench, drawing up plays and talking to the players, especially in late game execution, which has really been our Achilles heel.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you can overstate Pop's absence. I know he's older. I know he's at the tail end of his career, but that
Hmm.
doesn't change everything that he's done. Um, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, I just wanted to hit on what Mace said a little bit earlier. Harrison Barnes and Chris Paul are
Yeah,
also a huge factor to this as well. And I think we've seen some improvements with and Stephon Castle for that matter. Really,
yeah.
all three of those additions have been huge to improving the roster. Um, and all the stuff that Stefan or not, excuse me, not Stefan, all the stuff that CP3 and Harrison are doing for the rest of the roster off the court and even just teaching them things about the NBA, like with
Hmm.
Jeremy Sohan, calling them, Master Splinter and stuff like that. Like that is also stuff that, doesn't show up on the stat sheet, that was value that was brought with those guys that I think is definitely helping,
Hmm.
translate to more wins.
And it really gets me excited about thinking of who's the next vet that we bring in, who's the guy
Right.
that we trade for or sign. Because as much as we both love Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, in terms of veteran players that you'd bring to the team, those probably weren't on a lot of people's lists, right? When you
Mm-mm.
consider
No.
trades and free agent signings, but they've been tremendously impactful, like for all the reasons that you just said. So imagine when we get somebody that maybe has an all-star game recently
Right.
under his belt,
Right.
that'll be game changing.
Yeah, and same thing with the draft this year as
Mhm.
well. If we can get another rookie with similar or even more impact with what they're saying about the draft this year as a Stephon Castle
Yeah.
on top of, potentially another move that we could make with the amount of picks that we have, the door is wide open for the Spurs. The future for the Spurs is wide open. I know that's everybody already knows that. It's kind of been that way since we won the draft lottery for Victor, but
Mhm.
now it's really starting to come into shape. And with the improvements that we've seen so far this season, it's just continuing to keep those options open. And like you said, I think at the end of the day, it just gets me more excited to see what we bring in next or whatever decision we do moving forward. Also with the leaps too, like
Mhm.
with the way I know Jeremy's had some injuries this year, but what we've seen from Jeremy not having to play point guard, what's he going to look like next year with another leap? I know we're still looking for some of the other guys to make some jumps as well, but
Julian
br-
Champagny?
duh. See, that's another. I knew I was forgetting a name because I wanted to say Devin as well, but obviously, there's a
Right.
lot of conversation with him right now. Although he is coming off two back-to-back 20-point games.
Yes.
But still, like a Julian Champagny, somebody who's 22 years old, and we'll see what he looks like next season. I could go on, but it will definitely be interesting to see what the rest of this season holds for the Spurs and then what the offseason holds for them after, Ethan.
I know, yeah, I know it's all speculation. I know Brian Wright has to do a lot of things correctly. The team
Hmm.
has to improve, like blah blah blah. But we're fans at the end of the day, Jude. And I don't think it's wrong to be really excited about what the future looks like.
Completely agree. Couldn't have said it better myself.